Ladies and gentlemen, in an election season dominated by the usual political rhetoric of freebies and free-flowing name-calling, an intriguing promise by the Maha Vikas Aghadi has come across as a breath of fresh air. In its election manifesto, the Maha Vikas Aghadi, the opposition bloc, has promised employees in Maharashtra the right to disconnect if it comes to power. Now, you may ask, what is this right to disconnect? It means once you are done with your work hours for the day, you are no longer obligated to answer to or respond to any work-related communication from your boss. That means no phone calls, no emails, no WhatsApp messages from work that have to be entertained. Simply put, you can disconnect from office once you are done with your working hours and are free to then pursue a work-life balance. Sounds too good to be true? Well, actually, this is the norm in many European countries, with France being the first to institute the policy way back in 2016. It was followed by Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Ireland, amongst other countries. Australia has followed suit as recently as August this year, and even Chile in South America has a right to disconnect policy. But like them, ladies and gentlemen, India is not a first world nation. And maybe we don't have the luxuries which they do. At least that is the refrain coming from Indian honchos such as Narayan Murthy and Bhavish Agarwal, who claim that India should in fact increase its working hours per day and take it up to 70 hours a week in order to build a developed nation. That is something that Narayan Murthy had said. It came up for much debate. In fact, Bhavish Agarwal, the founder of Ola, has also claimed that the very notion of 5 days a week and work-life balance is a Western construct, that the Indian way is to take just 1 or 2 offs a day, offs a month. Well, the fallout of that worldview was the death of Anna, a young 26-year-old who worked for Ernst & Young. But here's the thing. Politicians can promise us, working-class, tax-paying citizens, the moon. But the ugly reality of India Inc. today is that we simply cannot afford to disconnect from our jobs even after logging off. Given the surplus of available labor in the job market, employers can easily exploit workers' insecurities, especially in the absence of strong labor laws. As long as corporate India continues to glorify the yes boss culture and normalize toxic, abusive and intimidating working environments, we will feel pressured, ladies and gentlemen, to remain always available, regardless of what the law might suggest or politicians may promise. A quick chat with my guest this evening, Krishna Hegde, spokesperson of the Shiva Sena, will be joining us on the broadcast. Anish Gawande is national spokesperson of the NCP from the Sharad Pawar faction with us. Lloyd Matthias is a business executive joining us on the broadcast. And Priya Chetty Rajgopal is the managing partner at Multiversal Advisory, joining us on the broadcast as well. I'm going to come to the politician on the panel first. Anish Gawande, it's very interesting to put the right to disconnect in a manifesto. I wonder what prompted it and whether the promise is realistic, because it cannot be bought by giving sops, right? You'll have to pursue corporates to do it.
No, it's...
And many people will say in India's working environment and culture, it's simply not possible.
You know, it's definitely deliverable, and it's definitely a promise we've kept since 2019. I'll remind you that it was Supriya Sule who'd introduced the right to disconnect private member bill in Parliament way back in 2019, right? Because the reality is that as a party, we've seen voters across age groups growing increasingly frustrated with the ways in which they're being made to work and the toll it's taking on people's lives. Now, you have to see the sort of right to disconnect within a broader ecosystem, right? We've also introduced the work from hometown policy, which is geared towards also ensuring high-quality internet access in the farthest flung areas of the state. You're also seeing these being combined with a menstrual leave policy for women. These have to be policies that are put in place, and these have to be conditions laid upon employers, because as you rightly said, the excess supply in the labor market will ensure that employers can take employees for a ride. So you need regulation. You need to ensure that employers are kept, they have to keep their word and be held up to a certain standard, and that's something we've tried to do in the manifesto, and even separately within our other legislative interventions in Parliament and beyond.
No, it's a great thought. There is no doubt about the fact that it's a great thought. Many people who are working class people, tax-paying people, honest people who come and do their works honestly will tell you it's a great idea, this is something that we need. But the fact is, it is not practical, Anish Gawande. It's not practical simply because we are a country of 1.4 billion people.
No.
We are a country where if you quit your job, just a minute, if you quit your job, there are 10 other people in line who are waiting to take your job. So, I mean, employees, that is the insecurity that most corporates exploit. We saw it happen in the case of Anna. We see it all around us as well.
You know, I'll just respond to that very quickly and very simply, right? 15 or 20 years ago, the same argument was made about environmental rights and protecting our environment. You're a third world country or a developing country, how can you care about your environment? We found ways to ensure that sustainability and development go hand in hand. Where there is a will, there is a way, and when voter pressure is applied onto politicians, they will find a way. And I want to say this very simply, the reality is that people are less productive when they're made to work like cattle. You know, you cannot whip somebody and make them work 100 hours a week and expect them to be productive. It's not helping the employer, it's not helping the employee, it's helping nobody. So sometimes somebody has to see sense in this and bring some rationality and logic into the discussion.
Lord Matthias, I mean, a lot of people will tell you that everyone knows what the logic in this conversation is. That if you're working 12 hours a day or 15 hours a day, doesn't necessarily mean that you are producing quality work. That your productivity remains what it was after 6 hours or 8 hours or 9 hours. But this is now India's work culture. And the fact is that it is what it is. It's very difficult to change.
That's right, Shreya. I think, you know, the reality or the sad part is India's work culture, specifically in the corporate workplace, has been, you know, sadly kind of pushing employees to the brink. What we saw recently with the young girl at EY a couple of months ago, I think is endemic to a lot of Indian corporates. Because companies tend to take employees' times for granted, right? It's quite normal for most corporates where people work pretty late, get calls from their boss on weekends, after office hours, impossible deadlines. So I think at one level, there's a reality. And I certainly want to compliment, you know, the political dispensation, in this case, you know, the Maharashtra Vikas Aghadi, for actually putting something like this onto the manifesto, the right to unplug. You know, so I think reality, I think it's good. It's a recognition of something that really bothers a lot of people in the corporate workspace. Having said which, I do hope it's not just virtue signaling. And the reason I say so is implementing something like this, as you rightly pointed out, in a labor surplus market, right? Where for every one vacancy, let's say there are 3 or 4 people trying to get in, is going to be difficult. But the fact that a political party or a political dispensation is signaling this as a real issue, I think is a wake-up call to a lot of corporates, that you have to recognize that when you get an employee to work, it's not just him bringing his whole self in, the fact that he has the right to unplug and he has a right to a personal life as much as he has to give his best during the working hours because it's a competitive work environment. I think you have to recognize the frailty of humans and the fact that for young people right now, office pressures are a serious mental health issue. So I want to compliment them for this, but I do hope that it's not just virtue signaling, and there will be steps to actually make this work in the workplace.
Well, one does hope that this is not political grandstanding, and we live in hope. But I would also like to remind my friend Anish Gawande what his own alliance partners have tried to do in different states. Anish Gawande, and I'm welcoming Krishna Hegdeji into the broadcast as well. Anish Gawande, the fact is that Tamil Nadu tried to introduce a 12-hour working day. they had to take a U-turn. Again, Karnataka, run by the Congress,
I
wanted
think
to
our alliance
introduce a
partners,
14-hour working day for IT professionals.
Alliance partners have learned.
Ek minute. I'm just pointing out something to you. Karnataka wanted IT professionals to work for 14 hours in a day. That had to take a U-turn as well after much outcry. And we are having this discussion at a point of time when the economic survey itself has suggested that India increases its working hours. So it's an interesting time, to say the least, to be having this conversation. Would you want to quickly say something about your alliance partners before I go to Krishna Hegde?
I want to quickly say that it's going to be public pressure that brings our alliance partners to reverse these policies in Tamil Nadu, and it's public pressure that's made us promise these things in Maharashtra today. I think this is not a grandstanding move, because listen, at the end of the day, this is something that's coming from the people of the state being reflected in the manifesto, and it's a long way forward. I don't think it's an easy path to tread, but it's a conversation that needs to be sort of started. Industry needs to be brought in. A realistic, workable policy needs to be brought around. The first step was taken by Shreya Dhoundial in 2019 with our private members bill, and I think we'll take that forward in the Maharashtra Assembly once we come to power.
Okay, Krishna Hegde, spokesperson of the Shiva Sena, of the Shinde faction, the ruling dispensation in Maharashtra. Krishna Hegde ji, idea तो अच्छा है, मैनिफेस्टो में डालना भी अच्छा आइडिया है. आप लोगों ने नहीं डाला ऐसा आइडिया मैनिफेस्टो में?
देखिए, हम कांग्रेस पार्टी के नेताओं जैसे नहीं हैं that they go to Thailand, switch off their phone, they go to US, they disconnect from the country and speak against the country from there. So this is, I think, this is the trait of the Congress party, and we don't want to get into this. However, said we want better working conditions for the people who are working in our country, and I think if Congress had little more maturity, they would have consulted first with the industry leaders, with the worker organization, with employee organization, but before taking a unilateral decision on their own. And I think this is going to affect industry, this is going to affect commerce, this is going to affect the productivity. However, I can say that in an 8-hour shift, after the 8th hour, if a person just does not pick up the phone call, then I think there's going to be a problem, especially in the bureaucracy. Anyway, you know that many of the bureaucrats do not pick up phones. And after 8 hours, if you tell them and call them, they are very much liable not to pick up calls and say that we can't do people. So people's work will also suffer. What I am saying is, stress should be, at workplaces should be less. Working conditions should be better. They should get better working conditions. But I think someone has misled the Congress into saying that better working conditions means just disconnect from office or disconnect your phone. And I think this is, Congress's way of looking at it. I don't think people from the workforce or from the employees or even the industry look at it this way.
Anish Gavan unilaterally putting it out in your manifesto. And where will it stop? Can doctors say hum 9 ghante ke bande? I'll quickly let you respond to that. He's saying, where will you stop? Did you consult anyone before unilateral? Kaam nahi karenge, don't call us. Can bureaucrats say it? Can you say it? If your boss says you need to be at an 11 p.m. show and your shift is over, will you say it? Now, if you can't say it, and if your boss will continue to call you after work hours, why expect someone in corporate India to be nice and kind and benign?
No. So let me start out by saying the obvious, right? That this is obviously something that has been discussed with people in industry and then has been introduced. This has been part of a slew of measures introduced across the world as well that is now attempted to being introduced in India. Today, the reality is you saw what happened after Anna's death. This is a real issue. To pretend like everything is hunky-dory and to say that people are not frustrated, that there does not need to be a change, is to avoid the gravitas of the situation. I mean, you can score only very few political brownie points with this, quite honestly. It's not like I'm getting 1 lakh more votes every constituency because I'm introducing a right to disconnect. This is coming from a principle of a politics of care. We have to have these conversations. Will they be the same for all industries? Absolutely not. Does an emergency room surgeon have to live up to the same standards as a McKinsey consultant? No. But the reality is that the conversation has to start somewhere. That these principles have to be adopted in some way, shape or form. Ask for a mile and sometimes you get an inch. And that's the policy that has to be taken forward. This has to be an honest, critical reflection about the ways in which employees are taken for granted. And I'll also say the last thing on this on my side. Today, more than ever before, young people are choosing their employers depending upon how these employers treat their employees. Shreya, you know this as well as I do, right? In political parties, in newsrooms, in consulting firms, you are choosing between equally good options depending upon how well your boss is treating you, how well your employer is treating you, how seriously they take your mental health. And very soon, companies are going to realize that there's not just a sort of excessive supply, but there's also a clear shortage of great talent. And when they realize that the best talent is moving away from them because they're creating inhuman working conditions for their employees, that's when companies will wake up as well. We're just taking that one step forward to begin with.
Okay, Priya Rajgopal, 80%, these are surveys that have been done by multiple agencies, and they seem to suggest that 80% employees in India, if you speak to them, say that they are burnt out, that they feel it's true, their working conditions are too stressful. 68% will say that, I am ready to take a pay cut if my work pressure is reduced. So there is clearly a problem when it comes to India Inc. and its working conditions. There's no doubt about that. But, I've been a working professional for the last 20, 22 years. You've worked for many, many years. Please tell me which employee will go to their HR and say, my boss called me on a Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon wanting data, email, XYZ. ये हमारे यहाँ नहीं होता है. Oops, I think what Priya was trying to do was put her audio on, and by mistake she has disconnected. I'll take that question to Lloyd Matthias, and then hopefully Priya will be patched with us and we can go back to us. Lloyd, would you want to come in here? Which employee in their right minds will complain about their bosses over something like getting a call or being asked for data or an email, or putting in 3 hours of work over a weekend? You simply don't do it because you won't last long in that organization if you do. That is India's work culture.
Absolutely. You're bang on there. You're absolutely right there, Shreya. I think it's very difficult. But all I'd like to say is that every employee reaches his own level of what works for them, right? There are people who I know who work 12 to 14 hours a day and enjoy every bit of it. They don't feel stressed at all. And there are younger people who at just 8 hours of intense work find it too stressful. So there will be imbalances. And the reality is right. A lot of bosses expect their employees to put in the late hours. They call them on weekends. But culturally, I think as a society, we have to move away from this. I know it's the first baby steps. I know because of a large working class population and limited jobs, there's always going to be pressure on employees to actually go the extra mile. But the very fact that we have to recognize that overworking is serious, it's endemic to corporate India. We've seen cases of younger people burn out very quick. We have some tragedies like the EY employee of a couple of months ago. So I think recognizing that is important, and also important to signal to corporate India that you've got to be more watchful. There is a talent crunch, but good quality talent starts valuing employers when the employers treat them with a lot of respect and dignity. And world over, the culture is moving. Large corporations today have informal rules, in fact, formal rules, where you don't send mails after office hours. And you don't normally engage employees on the weekend. You respect the fact that they need time to devote to their families, to their mental health, and to recharge themselves. So I think directionally it's right, but I do agree with you. There will be these little issues of bosses demanding, and I'm sure employees will have to take a call, right? Now and then you will have to go with it. On a very busy weekend, I'm sure elections and important days, people like you work 18-hour days. That's a reality. But I think the recognition is a very, very positive step.
Priya Chetty, hopefully we have you back on air. Go ahead, please. I had asked you a question. You were just about wanting to respond to it. But can I just quickly add something else that, Narayan Murthy has said, or people like Bhavesh Agarwal have said, that we are a developing country, and if you want to build a nation, then you have to work hard, and working 70 hours a week is what should be the norm. So this is what your industry leaders are saying. Where is the hope?
I'm going to come back to what Lloyd was saying. I completely support what he's saying. It's the message that goes out. It is the kind of attempt to set up a structure in place, which is to be applauded. So taking aside the whole issue of the politics of it and, grandstanding or whatever, the fact is that probably for the first time in the country, this conversation is being had as part of a manifesto. So I think that's a good thing. Uh, the issue is with anything that comes up. This is not even a dot on the horizon. It's a point in a manifesto of a party in one state. So it's, you're talking about a dot within a dot within a dot. The fact that it's out there is going to open a lot of eyes, and half the time it's because you become aware. Look at the Me Too movement as well. A lot of it was awareness, but when it got into legal, it became a very different, literally looking over your shoulder. I'm not suggesting it's the same thing, but when a consciousness about this issue comes up, and Anna's case is a very, very tragic case in point, where you literally saw the impact of inadvertent or unconcerned push towards goals. So you can see what happens if it goes wrong. So I think even the fact that we're having this conversation is a huge step in the right direction. So are we going to say from tomorrow morning, Shreya, you're going to decide not to take a call after 9 o'clock, which is or 5 in the morning, because if stories break at that time, will I not do something with the client if there's something urgent? We all have our pushes and pulls. We're going to respond because apart from being employees, we're also, and if a company does their work right, we're also invested in the goals of the organization. So we are moving towards that. We're not being cussed and saying, we will only do this as long as it suits us. If the company fails, so do we. There is a joint ownership of company goals, which I think any good employee would understand. So the keeping aside the issue of implementation, keeping aside the issue of whether it's really practical to do, or whether I could go to my boss and say, somebody called me, the awareness of it, the fact that it's being discussed, I'm telling you, it's a huge step in the right direction of one very simple thing: respect for the employee, and an understanding that the person is not a unidimensional that comes to work. So I'm happy with that. Moving aside, I said, all the other political implications, I'm saying the fact this conversation is being had is good.
Okay. 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 Krishna Hegde, would you want to come in here as spokesperson of the Shiva Sena? Almost everyone on this panel feels that the idea is very good. It's high time we had the sort of conversation we are having this evening. It may or may not be implementable, but baby steps are what are required. A lot of people on the other side, like Narayan Murthy, like Bhavesh Agarwal, have made the sort of argument that they have. I mean, Bhavesh Agarwal says, हमारे देश में तो concept ही नहीं था weekend off का, that India moved on the lunar calendar, and that Indians used to take 1 maximum 2 days off in a month. Narayan Murthy is saying you should work at least 70 hours a week if you want to build the nation. Can the Prime Minister's work ethic, एक minute, Krishna Hegde ji, can the Prime Minister's work ethic be put up as a role model for everyone? Look, the fact is that the Prime Minister is a very hardworking man. We all appreciate him for that, है ना? कि वो 16-17 घंटे काम करते हैं, 4 घंटे सोते हैं. He is dedicated to the nation. No one doubts that. But can that be held as an example to say that if a man in his late 70s is working 16 hours a day, why can't young people of today do the same? Because ये argument बहुत आती है.
Yeah, I think if you are ambitious and you want to do well, I think there has to be a work culture. And therefore, if someone like the Honorable Prime Minister has set it up, then people should automatically follow it. But I agree with Narayan Murthy ji and others because they are industry leaders. I think work hours, since I was also in corporate for a long time as a garment exporter, I must say that work hours must be the least of the stress. What is most stressful is, target stress or, pay scale stress, or ragging or bullying in office, or some other kind of stress which can happen, whether it's even maybe some other kind of stress, which is personal in nature. So it could be so many varied kind of stress. It's not only does have to do with the, working hours. But I must tell you that it's good that there is a discussion on this. At least we are taking a few steps forward. But however said and done, there is some emergency services and non-emergency services. In non-emergency services, it's still fine. But in emergency services, like if you tell a medical doctor, no, listen, he doesn't pick up the call, the patient might die. If there's a fire in the building and the fireman or the fire officer doesn't pick up the call, there's a huge problem. And if there is there is a police case or some woman is in distress and the police officer decides not to pick the call at the station, then you can understand what's going to happen. So it depends on situation to situation, workspace to workspace as to where can. So there can't be a a blanket thing like the manifesto of the MVA. I think that is extremely wrong. I think it's not. It's gone without a thought, and therefore I think they have to see and work on this before by speaking to all other concerned factors like industry or
Okay,
medicals
okay.
or everything.
No, so, obviously, Anish has made it very clear that, people like doctors, people like, people who work in the police force or in the armed forces or journalists, these rules obviously don't apply to them, right? Anish has made that very clear. But Anish,
Anish is
an
a
odd
little smarter
situation
boy
that
in
could
his
arise.
party, so that is okay. He can make it clear, but I don't think his party has understood that. They should consult Anish a bit more.
नहीं कैसी बात कर रहे हैं इमरजेंसी सर्विसेज तो emergency services तो सब समझते हैं ना क्या है and we know that emergency services were working during COVID days as well. All of us were working, right, including politicians. Anish Gawande, there's a very interesting, I don't have too much time, but this just occurred to me. If the MVA comes to power and brings in this do not disturb or the right to disconnect law in the state of Maharashtra, right? So it's a government that has brought in a law. Can that government afford to ignore bureaucrats who will not pick up their calls after 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock? Karenge kya aap? This will open a can of worms. You think it's for industry, but the government, I mean, given the fact that it is the government that is bringing in the law, you have to implement it as well. So what if your bureaucrats start saying 6 baje ke baad hum kaam nahi karenge, we to only work 8 to 5 or 8 to 6?
Shreya, very often the government keeps telling us how hard they work and for how many hours they work. My only response to that would be that you have to work efficiently, not by counting the number of hours that you work, but how much work gets done in those hours. I think we have to shed this rhetoric. We have to shed this rhetoric of me putting in 18 hours a day is going to mean me doing better, etc., etc. And let me just say one final thing is that this is a bill that is to be introduced in the Maharashtra Assembly. Unlike our peers sitting in Parliament who do not want to debate or discuss anything before it is passed, we are very open and welcome to all suggestions and discussions on the issue. And I can guarantee you that the first people who will come support us are the very same Shiv Sena union workers who Krishna Hegdeji's party represents, who are just as tired, just as frustrated, just as sort of overwhelmed with the pressures being put on them as those of the white-collar employees, as the white-collar employees are. And this is about reintroducing a politics of care. I think it's very, very sad today that our governments have stopped caring. And we have to ensure that we have concerns of citizens that are very real, brought to the table, discussed, debated, and then acted upon.
Okay, Anish Gawande, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. This was a good debate and a good discussion. I'm glad we could have this conversation. Thank you very much, Krishna Hegde, spokesperson of the Shiv Sena. We'll see if it comes to pass that the bill is actually introduced in the House in Maharashtra, what the Shiv Sena, the Shinde faction will do. Will it go with it or will it go against it? We'll wait and watch. वो बाद में ही चलेगा, पता चलेगा. Thank you, Lloyd Matthias, very much for your insights, and Priya Chetty Rajgopal, thank you very much for your perspective as well. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it's a wrap from me. News and updates continue. Thanks for watching.